The gospel comes from John, the 20th chapter. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side, and then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. And Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. For if you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." But Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. And although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Then Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in the book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. The Gospel. I have a story to share with you this morning. She was in her early 30s, and she had 2 elementary-aged children. And the last 5 years had been very, very difficult for her. It was the kids, mainly. You know, if she had been on her own, perhaps she would have been able to handle it. But the children, they really just didn't understand. They didn't understand where their daddy had gone. And they didn't believe her anymore when she was trying to reassure him that daddy only went to Georgia to find work and that he'd be home soon. Even in their little inexperienced minds, they didn't believe. They knew something was up. It was all her anxiety and her impatience and that hushed crying at night when she thought they were asleep. It had been so hard to keep up the charades. But he was home now. He was back and he was here in their lives, and she was happy. Her prayers had been answered. Sort of. He was back, and he was really trying. He was trying to connect to her and trying to reconnect with the kids, but he was different than he was before. There was a heaviness about him. He wasn't that carefree, fun-loving kind of guy that he used to be. This man didn't know how to laugh, and this man kept secrets. This man didn't trust her, and he didn't share with her like he had before. And now she was panicky with fear because he didn't come home last night. He was never not home. I mean, even when they were having disagreements and fussing, he was always home in his house. She just knew something bad had happened. She had no idea what it could have been, but she had that sense of panicky dread that she just couldn't get rid of. She thought back to yesterday, and she had called his cell phone in the afternoon just to let him know that she was thinking about him and how happy that she was that he was home. And she thought it odd that he hadn't answered, but she knew that he'd gone off job hunting, and perhaps he was having an important conversation at that moment. Maybe he was even in a job interview, and he was going to come home soon and tell her about this great new job he had landed. But then he didn't come home for dinner, and that's when she got really, really nervous. She had called his best friend Roger, but he didn't answer his phone either, even the second time she called. So she tried his wife, Gina. And Gina was crying. Gina was crying way too much. But Gina was able to say that Roger had come home late yesterday. He was upset and he was kind of scared and in a hurry. And he had been with her Joe, but he didn't know where her Joe was now. Roger had come in the house, packed some quick clothes, and left again in a hurry. And Gina hadn't heard from him since. And he won't answer his phone. Gina's scared. And the FBI keeps calling her. And Gina says they're asking questions that she just doesn't want to answer. There's that panicky fear again. Something bad has happened. She just knows it. And then the shriek of the phone startles her, and she stares at the number on the display, and, well, she knows that number. That's the probation officer. She had called earlier. That probation officer, she tried to calm her down and reassure her that everything was going to be okay. The probation officer, who was going to make some phone calls around and see what she could find out and get back to her. And now the phone was ringing. And she realized that she was so scared, terrified, never been this scared before in her life. There's a lot of things in our world that frighten us. As a child, there's probably nothing more frightening than being separated from your parent in a public place. You know, as a little kid, something catches your attention and you go running off to investigate. And then when your curiosity is satisfied, you turn around and look back and they're gone. Your parents, your family, your source of security is just not there anymore. For the first time, you're alone and you're scared. We have all had times when we're alone with fear. The disciples also experienced that. We heard it in our gospel lesson. They were alone, and the doors of the house were locked for the fear of the Jews. Their teacher, their leader, was gone, brutally murdered by the Jewish authorities. Were they to be next? And then Jesus came and stood among them. And all of a sudden, Jesus was with them, saying, "Peace be with you." And he showed them his hands, and he showed them his side. And he encouraged them to reach out and touch his wounds. To touch his wounds? Really? What do you suppose they looked like? How do you suppose they felt? Were these the same wounds from Good Friday? Those raw, red, bloody, torn flesh, the jagged, painful wounds, those ones screaming in pain, excruciating pain of all the sin of all the world. Do you think Jesus came to his disciples with those wounds? No, I think these wounds were probably different. These were resurrection wounds. They were no longer open and raw and painful like that. These wounds were not the Good Friday wounds. Good Friday wounds hurt really bad. But these are Easter wounds. And Easter wounds don't have that same pain. They can be touched and explored and shared with others. Easter wounds bring healing and life. The risen Christ comes to the disciples with his Easter wounds, and he says, "Peace be with you." And he breathes on them, and he tells them, "Receive the Holy Spirit." And the disciples are miraculously healed. They're healed of all their doubts and all their brokenness and all their fear. Relieved of their fear, everything that they were hiding from behind that closed or locked door is now no longer scary for them. The prince of this world no longer holds any power over them because Christ has defeated the evil of this world. And our wounds too are healed. Jesus shared the healing power of the Holy Spirit with the disciples, and he shares it with us through our baptisms. And we also remember what he's done for us when we celebrate the Holy Communion, Jesus, and we say, "This is my body broken for you. This is my blood shed for you and for all the people for the forgiveness of sins." All the suffering and the tragedy that we experience in our lives cannot compete with the redemptive power of Jesus. This life-giving power of the resurrected Christ. How else do you suppose people survive the horrific tragedies in life? How does a parent survive the death of a child? Or how do soldiers return home from the fear and brutality of war? How do children who suffer physical and maybe sexual abuse come to grow up to live lives of hope and satisfaction? Only through the healing power of the resurrected Lord does that happen. Only through Jesus do we overcome the struggle of pain in our lives. Where does your hope come from? Where does your healing and your restoration come from? Jesus meets us in our hiding places, behind those locked doors. He comes to us saying, "Peace be with you." And he comes to us repeatedly, as many times as we need him to hear his message, to see and touch these wounds, to know to come, to trust in his power. Where are you today? Are you hiding behind some locked door? Are you in fear of something in your world? Are you sitting there maybe with your head down in despair? Well, look up. Jesus is there going on before you. Look up and follow Jesus. Jesus goes to Thomas and tells him to look and see and to touch his wounds and to doubt no more. And to which Thomas replies, "My Lord, my God." And then Jesus declares, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Jesus speaks of us there and all believers who have come after him. How do the people of today learn to believe in Jesus? The same way the disciples did. They see the wounds. They see the wounds of Jesus through us and our wounds. They see the strength and the power of our faith through our wounds, through our sharing of our Easter wounds, through our brokenness and our suffering. Our scars and our wounds have new meaning. Maybe it was by chance or maybe by God's design. I had an opportunity to meet up with the woman in my story a few years after I supervised her husband. And she and I got to talking, and she shared with me what had happened during the intervening years. And just this before, I had heard how her strength of faith had seen her through the difficulties that she experienced. Now, she may have lost her husband during that incident, and it was horrible, and it took a while for her to recover from. But through her pain and her suffering, from out of her faith came a very strong affirmation of the new life that's available in Jesus. And in partnership with her church family, she had been accompanied through that darkness, through that fear of Good Friday, and she had come to her Easter morning with her new resurrection wounds. And now she was able to use those new resurrection wounds to help others. To help others through the pain of losing husbands and family members, to help and incarceration. Through her Easter wounds, she was able to bring the healing power of Jesus to other people. We can too. We are called to boldly go out in the world, despite our wounds, whatever they may be. And through the strength and the love of Christ, our scars also have new meaning for others. Meaning for others that are suffering. They are a saving message. The saving message of Jesus. As Jesus says to his disciples, he says to us also, "As the Father has sent me, so I send you." We are to greet others with the peace of the Lord. To invite others to touch and share in our Easter wounds. To come and see the saving power of Jesus. Because he is alive. He is risen. Peace be with you.